For thousands of years, human life moved at a pace the body could endure. Work followed daylight. Strength was measured in muscle and breath. Tools extended the hand, but never replaced it. A farmer, a craftsman, a merchant, all lived within limits set by flesh, weather, and time. The world was slow, and it was human. Then, almost without announcement, that balance began to shift. Not through a single invention, not through a single decision, but through a quiet accumulation of machines, built first to assist, then to outperform, and finally to command. Iron frames replaced wooden tools. Motion no longer depended on wind or water, but on energy drawn from deep within the earth itself. For the first time, power could be produced endlessly, predictably, and without rest. This was the moment when work stopped adapting to humans, and humans began adapting to work. Cities changed shape. Time fractured into minutes and seconds. Movement became mechanical. Repetition became discipline. What emerged was not merely a new technology, but a new order. A world organized around efficiency, output, and speed. A world where machines no longer served human rhythm. Human lives were reorganized around the rhythm of machines. This transformation did not arrive with celebration. It arrived silently, carried by coal dust, steam, and steel. And by the time it was fully visible, there was no return to what came before. We call this transformation progress, but progress has a structure, and every structure reshapes those who live inside it. This is not the story of invention alone. It is the story of adaptation, of bodies, cities, and societies reshaped to match the logic of machines. This is the age of machines. If you're enjoying this journey through time, remember to like the video and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? For most of human existence, the world moved at a speed dictated by nature. Morning arrived with light, not with a whistle. Work began when the body was ready, not when a clock demanded it. Across continents and centuries, daily life followed patterns so ancient they felt permanent. A village in the 1700s was not fundamentally different from one in the Middle Ages, or even from those that existed in antiquity. Production was intimate. A loom in the home, a forge in the yard, a workshop attached to the rhythm of family life. Tools amplified human effort, but they did not replace it. A hammer struck only as fast as an arm could lift it. A wheel turned only as long as water flowed or wind remained steady. Energy was finite, predictable, bound by geography and season. In this world, limitation was not a flaw, it was a condition of being human. Trade existed, but it was slow. Goods carried by horse, river, and sail. A shipment delayed by weather could alter fortunes. Distance still meant separation. Time itself felt different. It stretched, it breathed, it belonged to people. A craftsman knew every stage of his work. From raw material to finished object, creation remained visible and personal. Skill was accumulated through years, sometimes decades, of repetition and patience. This was not a world without hardship. Life was fragile. Famine and disease were constant threats. But work, however difficult, still followed a human scale. Then pressure began to build. Populations increased, cities grew denser. Demand expanded beyond what hands alone could satisfy. Textiles were among the first to strain the old system. Cloth was essential for clothing, trade, and status. And demand was no longer local, it was global. Merchants sought speed, states sought revenue, entrepreneurs sought advantage. And beneath the soil of certain regions, something waited: coal. For centuries it had been known, but rarely central. Dirty, difficult, often ignored in favor of wood and water. But coal held something different. Not just fuel, but stored time. Energy compressed over millions of years, ready to be released in a moment. As forests thinned and demand rose, attention shifted downward, from fields to mines, from surface to depth. At first, coal merely supplemented existing systems. It heated homes, It fired furnaces. It filled gaps. But its true power had not yet been realized. What followed was not an invention, but a reorientation. Not a breakthrough, but a chain reaction. Because once energy could be extracted in vast quantities, once power could be produced independent of nature, the old limits no longer applied. And when limits disappear, structures must change. The machine did not arrive to dominate. It arrived to solve a problem. But in solving that problem, it quietly rewrote the rules of the world. What began as assistance would soon become expectation. What began as efficiency would soon become dependency. And the moment humans crossed that threshold, there was no simple way back. In the next stage, the machine leaves the workshop and enters the system itself. For most of history, power was borrowed. Borrowed from animals, from rivers, from wind that could vanish without warning. Human ambition had always been constrained by what nature allowed. Coal changed that relationship. Unlike wood, coal did not depend on seasons. Unlike water, it did not require a river. Unlike wind, it did not disappear when needed most. Coal could be stored, moved, burned on demand. For the first time, energy became predictable. This alone would have been transformative. But coal came with a problem. As mines grew deeper, water followed, shafts flooded, work slowed, lives were lost. What miners needed was not more strength, they needed a new kind of power. The answer emerged not from theory, but from necessity. Early steam engines were crude and inefficient. They consumed enormous amounts of fuel. They groaned, leaked, and wasted heat. But they worked. Placed at the mouths of mines, these machines did one thing relentlessly. They pumped water. They did not tire. They did not pause. They did not negotiate. At first, steam existed only to serve extraction. It was a solution, not a revolution. Then refinement began. Small improvements accumulated. Efficiency increased. Fuel consumption dropped. With each iteration, steam became less dependent on location and more adaptable to purpose. The crucial shift came when steam was no longer tied to a single task. Once rotary motion was perfected, steam could turn wheels, and wheels could drive machines. Power was no longer something you waited for, it was something you generated. This marked a turning point deeper than any single invention. Factories no longer needed rivers. Production no longer paused for drought or winter. Work could continue day and night. The machine had escaped the mine. Energy, once invisible and abstract, now shaped architecture itself. Buildings grew larger to house engines. Floors were reinforced to carry weight. Layouts changed to accommodate shafts, belts, and gears. Entire spaces were redesigned around motion, and with steam came scale. A single engine could replace dozens of workers. A single system could coordinate hundreds of machines. Output surged beyond anything previously imaginable. But this new power came with a condition. Machines demanded consistency. They required steady input, uniform motion, regular maintenance. Irregular human rhythms became a liability. The body was no longer the measure of work, the machine was. Speed increased. Tolerance narrowed. Variation was eliminated. What mattered now was synchronization. This transformation spread outward, touching everything it encountered. Iron production expanded as steam-powered blast furnaces burned hotter and longer. Metal became cheaper, stronger, more abundant. Structures that once seemed impossible, bridges, frames, railways, moved from imagination to blueprint. The physical world hardened. But beneath the visible changes, something quieter was happening. Power, once shared among many small sources, was becoming centralized. Control shifted to those who owned engines, fuel, and space. Workplaces grew larger. Ownership grew more distant. Decisions moved upward. The machine did not only change how things were made, it changed who decided how they were made. What began as a response to water in a mine had evolved into a system that reorganized production itself. Energy was no longer just unleashed, it was organized. And once organized, it demanded order everywhere else. In the next part, this new power reshapes cities, labor, and daily life, forcing humans to adapt to the tempo of machines. The machine did not remain confined to workshops and factories. It spilled outward, reshaping the spaces where people lived. Cities began to swell. What had once been market towns and regional centers turned into magnets for labor. People arrived faster than housing could be built. Streets filled, walls closed in. Urban growth was not planned, it was reactive. Factories were erected wherever power, fuel, and transport allowed. Homes followed as an afterthought. The result was density without design. Families crowded into narrow rooms. Air stagnated. Water became a risk rather than a resource. Yet people continued to come. In the countryside, the old systems were breaking down. Common lands disappeared. Agricultural efficiency reduced the need for labor. Survival pushed people toward the city, even when the city offered little comfort in return. Inside the factory, a new order ruled. Work no longer followed the sun, it followed the clock. Time was divided, measured, enforced. Minutes mattered, seconds accumulated. The bell signaled the beginning and end of labor. Not readiness, not exhaustion. This was a profound shift. For the first time, large populations were required to synchronize their lives with machines. Human variability became a problem to be managed. Movement was standardized, tasks were simplified, repetition replaced craft. Skill, once accumulated slowly, was fragmented into steps. A worker no longer made an object, they maintained a motion. This increased output. It also created distance. Distance between the worker and the result of their labor. Distance between effort and meaning. The body adapted, but at a cost. Long hours reshaped posture. Repetitive motion wore joints and tendons. Fatigue became chronic rather than temporary. Children entered this system early. Their size made them useful. Their obedience made them desirable. Their vulnerability made them invisible. Entire generations grew up inside the rhythm of machines, learning discipline before learning language. Outside the factory walls, cities struggled to cope with the consequences. Waste accumulated. Rivers darkened. Air thickened. Disease followed density. Illness spread faster than understanding. Life expectancy dropped in industrial centers. Survival became unevenly distributed. And yet, alongside the suffering, something else emerged. A new social layer began to form. Managers, clerks, engineers, people whose work involved oversight rather than exertion, coordination rather than motion. They lived differently. Their homes were cleaner, their streets quieter. This divide was not accidental. The machine rewarded proximity to control. Those who directed systems benefited from their efficiency. Those who served them absorbed their strain. The city became a map of this imbalance. Centers of commerce and administration stood apart from districts of labor. Comfort and deprivation existed side by side, separated by little more than distance. The machine had not only reorganized work, it had reorganized society itself. And as cities expanded, the question was no longer whether this system could continue, but how long humans could endure its pace. In the next part, pressure gives rise to resistance, reform, and new ideas about power, labor, and human limits. The machine age did not advance without friction. For many, it arrived not as progress, but as loss. Skills that once took years to master became obsolete in a generation. Craftsmen who understood every fiber of their work were replaced by systems that valued speed over knowledge. For those displaced, the future felt abrupt and unforgiving. Anger followed displacement. In workshops and mills, resentment grew quietly. Then, at times, violently. Workers smashed frames and looms, not out of ignorance, but out of desperation. These machines were not symbols of innovation. They were symbols of redundancy. The response was swift. States protected industry. Factories were guarded. The system closed ranks. The machine had become too important to fail. But resistance did not disappear. It evolved. Workers began to recognize a simple truth. Alone, they were replaceable. Together, they were not. This realization gave birth to new forms of organization. Unions emerged slowly, often illegally. Strikes disrupted production. Negotiation entered spaces once governed only by command. For the first time, labor began to push back against the logic of pure efficiency. At the same time, reform followed exposure. Conditions inside factories became impossible to ignore. Children working long hours, bodies breaking early, lives shortened. Public awareness grew. Laws were passed, cautiously, reluctantly, to limit working hours, regulate child labor, and impose minimal standards of safety. These changes did not dismantle the system, they adjusted it. The machine remained central. But the idea that human limits mattered had entered the conversation. Beyond factories and streets, the machine age provoked something deeper, a crisis of meaning. Thinkers, writers, and observers began to question what had been gained and what had been lost. Some saw liberation, others saw alienation. The world felt faster, louder, more crowded. Nature receded behind brick and smoke. Silence became rare. Art responded with nostalgia and warning. Philosophy responded with critique. Economics responded with new theories of growth and value. Even the environment began to speak. Rivers poisoned by waste, air thick with soot. Land reshaped to serve extraction rather than life. The consequences of industrial speed could no longer be confined to factories alone. And yet, despite resistance, reform, and reflection, the trajectory did not reverse. Too much depended on the system now. Cities relied on it, empires relied on it. Daily life was entangled with its output. The machine age adapted, absorbing criticism, modifying practices, and continuing forward. What began as a response to scarcity had become a foundation of modern existence. The question was no longer whether humanity could stop the machine. It was whether humanity could live with what it had created. In the final part, the machine leaves its birthplace and reshapes the world permanently. The machine age did not advance without friction. For many, it arrived not as progress, but as loss. Skills that once took years to master became obsolete in a generation. Craftsmen who understood every fiber of their work were replaced by systems that valued speed over knowledge. For those displaced, the future felt abrupt and unforgiving. Anger followed displacement. In workshops and mills, resentment grew quietly. Then, at times, violently. Workers smashed frames and looms, not out of ignorance, but out of desperation. These machines were not symbols of innovation, they were symbols of redundancy. The response was swift. States protected industry, factories were guarded. The system closed ranks, the machine had become too important to fail. But resistance did not disappear, it evolved. Workers began to recognize a simple truth. Alone, they were replaceable. Together, they were not. This realization gave birth to new forms of organization. Unions emerged slowly, often illegally. Strikes disrupted production. Negotiation entered spaces once governed only by command. For the first time, labor began to push back against the logic of pure efficiency. At the same time, reform followed exposure. Conditions inside factories became impossible to ignore. Children working long hours, bodies breaking early, lives shortened. Public awareness grew. Laws were passed, cautiously, reluctantly, to limit working hours, regulate child labor, and impose minimal standards of safety. These changes did not dismantle the system, they adjusted it. The machine remained central, but the idea that human limits mattered had entered the conversation. Beyond factories and streets, the machine age provoked something deeper, a crisis of meaning. Thinkers, writers, and observers began to question what had been gained and what had been lost. Some saw liberation, others saw alienation. The world felt faster, louder, more crowded. Nature receded behind brick and smoke. Silence became rare. Art responded with nostalgia and warning. Philosophy responded with critique. Economics responded with new theories of growth and value. Even the environment began to speak. Rivers poisoned by waste, air thick with soot, land reshaped to serve extraction rather than life. The consequences of industrial speed could no longer be confined to factories alone. And yet, despite resistance, reform, and reflection, the trajectory did not reverse. Too much depended on the system now. Cities relied on it. Empires relied on it. Daily life was entangled with its output. The machine age adapted, absorbing criticism, modifying practices, and continuing forward. What began as a response to scarcity had become a foundation of modern existence. The question was no longer whether humanity could stop the machine. It was whether humanity could live with what it had created. In the final part, the machine leaves its birthplace and reshapes the world permanently. The age of machines did not arrive as an invasion. It arrived as an agreement to trade slowness for speed, skill for efficiency, presence for output. What began as a solution to human limits became the framework of modern life itself. Our cities still follow its logic. Our schedules still obey its rhythm. Our expectations still echo its demand for more. Faster, cheaper, constant. We live surrounded by systems set in motion long before we were born. Systems that promised control, yet quietly reshaped what control means. The smoke has faded, the engines have changed form, but the structure remains. To understand the modern world is to recognize this inheritance, not with nostalgia and not with fear, but with awareness. Because every age leaves behind a rhythm, and the one we live with was forged in iron, steam, and motion. If this journey through time helped you see the present more clearly, take a moment to like this video. It helps this history reach others. Share your thoughts in the comments. How do you feel the age of machines in your daily life? And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next era we explore together. The moment fades, but its meaning remains. This is Old World View.